Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
We're discussing Chapter 21, Paragon of the Ludlucks.
21?
Yeah. Last week, you were kind of at odds with the chapter title,
Yeah.
Prisoners, or whatever. This week, I think it's kind of a masterpiece.
Yeah.
I think it's really good for a couple reasons. One, I mean, it's kind of straightforward. It's Paragon, right? The ship.
Right.
He's of the Ludlucks. But Paragon is also meaning like the best example of, or pretty much the best example of. So if you say a paragon of virtue, they're the best example of virtue. So the paragon of the Ludlucks could be Kennit.
Yeah.
He is the best example of the Ludlucks because the Ludlucks have not been described very charitably over these books, to be fair.
Yeah, I don't think most of them do well in general.
I mean, I can forgive Amos, right? Because she's like kind of all that's left of her family, and she has inherited the laughingstock and the bad juju that Paragon was on the beach.
Yeah.
And she's still, kind of traumatized by that, grew up with all that trauma, and from her parents who probably knew the previous people who died. Okay, yeah, sure. She still sold Paragon and wanted to get rid of him and didn't care what happened to him. So, not the greatest family.
I don't know. Well, everything that we hear about how they treated Paragon doesn't seem super great.
Yeah.
And
well, that's why I said even Amos, because that was the first time Amos had ever met Paragon.
That's true. But it kind of points to probably the whole bunch is rotten, not just the few that are on the ship, I guess.
So maybe Kennit is the paragon of the Ludlucks.
True. And I mean, that is multitudinal. I don't know if that's a word, but because there's also the fact that Paragon holds all of the memories of the Ludlucks, including a lot of Kennit's memories. So, yeah.
Good title. But this is the one where they finally have a confrontation. They don't quite meet yet, Althea and Kennit.
Right.
But the beginning. So we start with Althea. She and Brashen and the rest of the crew on the Paragon are still anchored off the coast of some island that Brashen had studied, charts of and guessed this is the way that Kennit was going to come. So Althea's in the mast. She's on the lookout for Vivacia to come through. Has already had a couple false alarms and calls. Thought she saw a ship and thought it was the Vivacia. Hasn't been correct yet, but she is still on the lookout on the mast, watching the horizon for familiar sails and masts, which she eventually sees.
And this time she knows for sure it is Vivacia and does not need confirmation from Brashen or anyone else. And she just talks about how there's no way it could be any other ship. She knows it as well as she knows a loved one or a family member. And I found that really interesting, this idea that like knowing her ship even from a distance and that this is the one, especially because we know that she had all those false alarms, but also with the magic that surrounds the making of these live ships and the blood bond that they share.
Yeah.
And so
it's not surprising.
No, but I did find that really interesting.
But also there is a difference in how ships look, right? Because you can tell on the distance in here if it's Chalcedonian versus if it's from Bingtown or whatever. This is not the era of mass-produced things.
Right.
All of these are handmade, hand-carved, and hand sculpted, and the masts are planed by hand and built by hand and modeled by hand and not computer aided. So they're all going to be slightly different.
Yeah. And I guess especially coming from someone who probably spent a lot of time in the rigging of Vivacia, it probably is really easy to tell the slight differences once you see it, and it is that ship.
So she scampers down the mast, doesn't even cry out, but she barges into Brashen's room. He is sleeping at the moment, trying to get some rest before his watch is up, and says, "This is it. It's not a false alarm this time. I know it for sure." He did not question her. He took a deep breath. "Then it's time. Let's hope that Kennit is truly as intelligent and rational as you believe he is. Otherwise, we're offering our throats to a butcher. For a moment, she could only stare at him wordless. Sorry, he offered huskily. I didn't need to say that. We both decided on this plan. We've both convinced the crew it will work. Don't feel I'm putting it all on you. She shook her head. You only spoke aloud what I've been thinking for too many days. One way or another, Brashen, it is all upon me. But for me, this ship and this crew would not even be out here, let alone considering this mad plan. They hug each other, and then he becomes the captain and says, okay, run up the truce flag, relay some other commands that Althea is thinking, well, the crew doesn't really need to know this, we've drilled, but he's stepping into his role.
Right. And I think this moment is a really interesting look into how their relationship works, but also how they're feeling about this.
Mm-hmm.
So last time we were with Brashen and Althea, they hadn't told anybody the plan yet. And this was sort of a harebrained idea on Althea's part. And now they've taken steps to make this is the plan. This is what they're doing. And I find that really interesting. And then especially this whole separation that happens where they're being lovey-dovey, they're a couple, and then there's that taking of a breath and stepping into the roles that they need to play. And I wonder if part of that is because they are still trying to play at just being captain and first mate in front of everybody else, or if it's just part of how they get through the toughness of this situation.
Even without the situation, I think that they would still have these roles. I think both of them understand there needs to be that separation. There needs to be that chain of command. There needs to be two separate lives that they live because they do work together versus live together. So with the commingling of them in their personal and their work lives, because they all live on one cramped boat, there has to be some sort of divide. There has to be some sort of, we're not the couple right now.
Right.
We are captain and first mate. So they both have to believe that, one, that Brashen will trust Althea to obey his commands without question because she is his subordinate.
Right.
But also for Althea to trust that Brashen won't throw himself into danger to save her because this is her job as well, right? There's a growth there in their relationship that they trust each other in these roles now and they're kind of settling in, which is really nice. And it's also a maturity in their relationship that when Brashen makes this, as he often does, blunt observation of something that probably didn't need to be said, they don't result to shouting and running away or anything, you know?
It isn't taken the wrong way.
Yeah.
It's kind of discussed immediately and
it's becoming a relationship rather than just a dalliance.
Yes. Which is cute. But we leave the captain and first mate and go over to Kennit's ship where he is being briefed by Genghis, who is pointing out the ship of Paragon.
Old Genghis is still around. If you recall, he was in the first chapter of Ship of Magic with Kennit. He was the old sailor that went to Other Island with him.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they're seeing that there's a ship in the distance. He's relaying it to Kennit, saying, yeah, I see him. Go about your duties. He stared at the masts and riggings. A strange certainty filled his soul. The old lookout left Kennit's side, chastened by his captain's tone. The chill wind blew past Kennit, and his ship plunged on through the waves, but he was suddenly separate from it all. The ship was Paragon. The other half of his soul rode at anchor in the inlet. Can I know him from this far away? He asked himself, softly. How? Is it a feeling in the air, a scent on the wind? Blood calls to blood, whispered the charm at his wrist. You know it's him. He's come back to you. After all these years, he has come back. Kennit tried to breathe, but his lungs felt heavy and sodden. Dread and anticipation warred in him. To speak to the ship again, to tread once more his decks would be to come full circle. All the past defeats and pain would be drowned in that triumph. The ship would take joy in how he had prospered and grown, and no, it would not be like that. It would be confrontation and accusation, humiliation and shame. It would be opening the door to all past sorrows and letting them pour out to poison the present. It would be looking into the face of your betrayed beloved. It would be admitting that what he had done to ensure his own selfish survival. Worse, it would be public. So Kennit has also the same feeling that the ship on the horizon is Paragon. He knows it in his soul. The charm does too.
Right.
And he is at once both anticipating and dreading this encounter.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that his first gut reaction is, oh, this will be a good homecoming. Paragon's going to be so proud of me. And then it turns into, no, it can't be that way. It'll be betrayal. It'll be awful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just find that so interesting. And I wonder.
As we find later, both of them think that. Paragon thinks that too.
Yeah, and I do wonder if that's due to just the general his trauma, or if that is due to what Paragon has done with taking some of his pain away, if that makes sense. Like if that's an effect of.
I mean, it could, but I think it's also just based on their last interactions as well, right?
Yeah.
Because now that Kennit knows that he's alive, Paragon didn't fulfill his promise, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is sailing for somebody else. He brought people who could possibly kill Kennit to Kennit. Like there's a lot of, in their eyes, there's a lot of wrong on both sides of this relationship.
Right.
So I think both of them, Paragon and Kennit, are anticipating all of that to kind of bleed into any kind of homecoming that there could be. And yeah, it could be with taking the pain away or the trauma that both of them have had growing up, but I don't know. It just makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't know where it comes from exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting too to have this, once again, a mirror with Althea and Kennit, where they both see their ships from a distance. They both know instinctively, but also have these multitude of emotions. It's not just joy. There's also that fear of rejection.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, I just wanted to quick say, as you were reading that, I noticed that my copy, which is the Australian version of the book, had one less sentence than yours did.
One less sentence?
Yeah.
Really?
You had an extra sentence in there. Near the beginning, but let me see. It was can I know him from far away? He asked himself softly. How? Is it a feeling in the air, a scent on the wind? And then blood calls to blood, whispered the charm at his wrist. You know it's him. After all these years, he has come back.
Oh, yeah, he's come back to you.
Yeah, just gone. Not in there.
Weird.
Right? Like, what a weird edit to make.
Yeah.
But you read that, he's come back, and I went, huh? That's not there.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a really odd edit.
Yeah.
So yeah, the other part of this that we've talked about, their reunion together, is that Kennit is dreading the publicity of it because his whole thing is secrecy, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about this over and over again, how these secrets come back to haunt him and how he cannot let that happen. And so naturally comes to the conclusion that Paragon has to die.
Right. And before he gets there, I think it's really interesting that he just feels as though it has to be true that whenever Paragon is there, whenever everybody sees the two of them near each other, everyone will know everything that has ever happened to him. All of his secrets will be laid bare. Everybody will know. And he cannot have that. And I wonder if that's because he thinks that Paragon told Althea and Brashen everything. And so that crew just knows everything about Kennit. Or if that's just more of his fear coming out of it's not necessarily rational. It's more just a trauma reaction of I'm that scared little boy again and there's nothing I can do.
Yeah. I mean, he kind of talks about that too, the scared, beaten boy. He says that his past would resurface when they're together and everyone would know. The crew, Bolts, Etta, Wintro, all of them. and all of the years of work would come undone because he thinks that if people know the past, they won't look to him as a king anymore. He could not allow it. Despite the screaming in the back of his mind, he could not allow it. The past could not be changed. The beaten, begging boy would have to be silenced once more. One last time, he would have to erase the groveling, craven lad from the world's memory.
Once again, there is a sentence missing in the Australian version.
Really?
Yeah. It's despite the screaming in the back of his mind, he could not allow it. The beaten, begging boy would have to be silenced once more.
The past could not be changed is what was eliminated.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I need to read your version to see what I missed.
I feel like I've read a lot of it, so I feel like we haven't missed too much, at least. This chapter is odd, though. Then Jola comes running up, because I think Jola is his current first mate. Says, "Sir, that ship the lookout spotted, they've unfurled a flag. It's, a truce flag. They want to talk."
Right.
And Kennit, in his mind, is like, well, I have to silence this groveling boy from surfacing in the memory of the world again.
Yeah.
So in his mind, he has to silence Paragon. He has to silence the crew over there because they can't talk in case they know.
Right.
So he tells Jola, "I suspect treachery. Falden's message warned me of it. I will not be lulled by their actions. If necessary, I shall make an example of this crew and its ship, of this ship and its crew. If this is perfidy, the ship goes to the bottom with all hands. Prepare yourself to hear many lies today, Jola. This particular captain is a very clever man. He tries to use a live ship to take a live ship. We must not allow that to happen, of course." Is that another sentence?
We will not allow that to happen.
Oh, we must not. That's a smaller change.
Yeah,
at least.
smaller, but I just, well, is "of course" in there?
Yeah.
That's not there. It's just, we will not allow that to happen, period. End of sentence.
That's even more odd because the other ones were kind of, they were just restating.
Right.
And this one is a change in tone.
Yeah.
We must not allow that to happen, of course. And we will not allow that to happen. And that
changes it. Yeah.
It changes what he's saying to Jola because in my version, the "we must not allow that to happen," of course, is, in my opinion, typical Kennit, right?
Right.
He's talking to Jola, he's giving his opinions, and it's like, this is the best course of action we should take. And I'm just pointing out logically, of course, we can't allow that to happen.
Right. And this one
yours is just ordering.
Yeah. Well, also earlier it said Falden's message warned us, not I read or whatever.
Warned me of it is what it says. Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting because here it makes it seem like they've already discussed that.
Yeah.
And that he's now in charge. He's drawing the line. He's saying, we're doing this instead of playing the part of affable sea captain. I don't know. Weird. What an interesting change. I wonder how they decide.
I think those changes in that passage at least were for the worse for that one.
Yeah, I would agree.
Anyways, as he says this, as he says it out loud that, they're going to speak a lot of lies, we might have to sink the ship and all of its crew, his throat closed with pain, terror rose in him that Jola might turn toward him just now and see his eyes brim with sudden tears. Feelings change, he reminded himself savagely. This is the choking of a boy, the tears of a boy who no longer exists. I stopped feeling this long ago. I do not feel this.
I do not feel this is not in my copy.
So a lot of just the reassertion of things is missing. Okay. Yeah, he has that moment of weakness in his own words as he tries to cover it with coughs. But he feels very strong emotions towards Paragon still.
Yeah, and this is pretty big because I feel as though Kennit hasn't ever really given us strong emotions unless they're panic. Not that this isn't panic, I guess, but this feels like care. He's sad about losing Paragon, that Paragon will be gone.
There's a moment in here later where he talks to Edda briefly that I want to bring up later, but it kind of relates to this, that in his mind, and we've talked about this before, he lies to himself about how much he cares for Etta.
Yes.
Right? And how he's grown to care for her.
Yes.
But he actually shows the emotion with Paragon here.
Yes.
Which goes to show that in his mind, Paragon is the only one who he can care for, he can trust. And that might be the blood magic, the bond, that kind of gives him that feeling, because that bond happened before all the bad things happened that Paragon took away, right? That happened, even Paragon took away some of the good memories that happened, but he can't take away the bond. He can't take away the feeling that they have for one another. So I feel like this is the only emotional connection he's allowed to have.
Yeah.
And allow himself to feel.
Well, because not allow himself to feel, because
I think it's partially self-deception.
Okay.
And partially the magic, because I don't want to blame everything on him getting partially forged.
Right.
Because he has had 30 years to grow up and form new connections and form more memories and core memories.
Right.
So I'm not blaming everything on that partial forging, but I think everything after that, he's deceiving himself, because again, there are a couple things in here that we can talk about later.
Right. Well, and obviously what he went through was really horrific, even with some of it being taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the bond that you would have with somebody who was with you through that, who supported you and was the only lifeline you had, the only person who cared about you, that you were in contact with constantly, that has a lasting impression, right? That's, of course, you're going to still feel something for them. I don't know.
Yeah, so he has to cover up that emotion because he can't show weakness, of course.
Right. But I also am dying to know what Jola thinks of his captain randomly tearing up about this. Like,
if he saw.
But if he did, I wonder if it's like, oh, he's worried about losing Vivacia or what?
Yeah.
I don't know, because Kennit's not kind. So I don't know, just a weird question that I had.
Mm-hmm. So Kennit also says his plan that we'll pretend to be gulled by this ruse, and I shall have the ship send forth the serpents. I doubt that Trell knows of our serpents. Let him negotiate his truce with them.
I doubt Trell knows of these serpents is not in my version.
So he makes his way forward, and he's thinking again about this situation here. None of them really pause to look at him. None of them could really see him anymore, talking about his crew. They only saw Kennit, king of the Pirate Isles. And was that not what he always wanted? To be seen as the man he had made him of himself? Yet still he could imagine how Paragon would bellow in dismay at the sight of his missing leg, or exclaim in delight over the fine cut of his brocade jacket. Triumph was not as keen, he suddenly saw, when it was shared only with those who had always expected you to succeed. On all the seas and all the world, there was only one who truly knew all Kennit had gone through to reach these heights, only one who could understand how keen the triumph was and how deep the pits of misfortune had been, only one who could betray his past so completely. Paragon had to die. There was no other way. And this time, Kennit must be sure of it. So he goes up to Bolt.
Right. And unfortunately, and to his dismay, Wintro and Etta are already at the figurehead, and Wintro is engaged in a heated conversation with Bolt.
Yeah, always talking about Vivacia.
Yes.
So he's thinking as he walks up in there, and he can already make out the familiar figurehead of Paragon from this distance. His heart turned over at the sight of the cruelly chopped face. Shame burned him, followed by a rush of fury. It could not be blamed on him. No one, not even Paragon, could blame him. Ygritte's fault. It was all Ygritte's fault.
I think that's such an interesting reaction to have, and it feels like the reaction of a little boy. Yeah. And I don't mean that like in a negative way. It's not, I mean, it sounds negative, but it's not necessarily. It just feels very juvenile, especially with, I guess, how unjuvenile Kennit usually is.
I mean, because it relates directly to how Paragon feels about things.
Right.
We've seen Paragon do that exact same rationalization.
Yeah.
Just, it's not my fault.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess,
I was forced to do it.
it's not like,
I mean, he was, but
yeah. But also, it's not like Kennit doesn't also pretend like he's not at fault for various things.
Right.
But I think this is the first example of how similar the two of them are and just how connected they still are, even after all this time.
Dread dizzied him, so he lifts his hand towards his head, and the charm whispers to his ear as he's still approaching Etta and Wintro. And the charm says, "You let him take all the pain for you. He said he would, and you let him." The charm smiled. "It's all still there, just waiting for you, with him."
So this is really interesting, and I do want to speak on this. Earlier in the book, I think this book even, we get the point of view from Paragon where he talks about secretly taking the bad away from Kennit.
Was it secretly?
I thought he said he did it multiple times over years.
I feel like maybe I said that.
Okay.
And I was mistaken. Maybe I could be wrong. I could be misremembering this.
Maybe. I just thought that it was whenever the boy was asleep and having nightmares, he would take away the nightmares.
Yeah, I remember that part.
Yeah. So multiple times doing this. And then now in this chapter, there was one big time where Paragon offered. And I mean, both can be true.
Yeah, they both can be true.
It doesn't have to be either or, but I just find it really interesting that is brought up here and that's something that Kennit actually does know about himself, that there are parts missing because he gave them to the ship.
Yeah. Well, he is very mad at the charm, and he's oddly clumsy because he's trying to tear the charm off and he can't.
He is panicking. A lot of this section really reminds me of a panic attack. It says before that his he was trembling a little, and then the comment happens to him. Kennit says, "Shut up," he grated. With trembling fingers, he tried to unknot the damnable thing from his wrist. He would throw it overboard. It would sink and be gone forever with all it knew. But his fingers were oddly clumsy, almost numb. He could not undo the tight leather knots. He tugged at the charm itself, but the cords held. Kennit, are you well?" "Stupid whore, always asking the wrong questions at the wrong time." He wrenched his emotions under control. He took out his handkerchief and patted the sweat from his chilled brow. He found his voice. "I'm quite well, of course. And you?"
Yeah. So he was blood rushed to his face. He was dizzy, clumsy, shaking, and sweating while it's cold outside.
Yeah, and I think especially that outburst at Etta, who is asking, "Are you okay?" with concern, and just that immediate
well, it's in his head.
I mean, yes, obviously. It's not what he's doing out loud, but what we're seeing from him and what's going on in his head, it really does feel, at least from my point of view as someone who has panic attacks, it feels a lot like the start of a panic attack where it feels like everything's going out of control and your whole body is kind of foreign and not doing what you need it to do. And it's just increasingly freaking you out, sort of. But he does calm himself. He gets himself under control and realizes that he needs to handle this a different way.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that Kennit has is impeccable control over his body and his emotions.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic actor. And we've debated that before, whether he thinks he is or he actually is, but he has made a lot of people follow him. So
I think he is probably a good actor. But also, I mean, it is a coping mechanism, right? Just to push away the bad and pretend to be suave Kennit, who is under control.
And again, we see that here because Etta's like, "You looked so, for an instant, I feared you would faint." She tries to take his hand in hers, and he's like, "That would never do." He smiles a little bit at her and thinks distract her. "The boy, this may be hard for him. How is he?" Torn, Etta immediately confided in him. A lesser man might have been offended at how easily he had turned her concern from himself to Wintro, but it was, after all, only a whore. So this is what I was talking about before of how he self-deceives a bit. Because he does care for her. He does care for her attention, and he is jealous that he distracted her so easily with mention of Wintrow.
Right.
A
But
lesser
also,
man would have been jealous.
Yeah.
You are too,
Okay.
but you're convincing yourself that you're not because you're a
Exactly.
great man in your mind.
But also, I think it's really interesting that he's taking it, he has a jealous reaction to it in his own way, because I feel as though, from Etta's point of view, from what we know of how she views Kennit, his little small smile when she was showing care on the deck in front of everyone and then asking a different question was a way for him to say, hey, not right now. And she is abiding by that. Like, I feel like in her mind, she's thinking, oh, yeah, like, I can't do it. He's supposed to be the captain right now. A lot like how Althea and Brashen have that divide.
Yeah.
I think Etta is also aware of that with how she thinks Kennit feels for her, because he's only nice to her in private or whatever, but it's a charm, whatever. So I feel as though, the way I read it, this isn't because Etta's suddenly distracted by Wintrow. This is Etta realizing he wants to change the topic because he's captain right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. So I just found it really interesting that he's like, oh, of course she's distracted by Wintrow.
So she switches the topic over to Wintrow as well and dives into that and speaks on what we were talking about at the beginning of this part of the chapter. How Wintrow is basically only talking about Vivacia to Bolt and how she should feel. And he reminded her that you had promised him Althea would not be harmed. And Bolt laughed and said that was your promise, not hers. Etta says that makes him feel really poorly. So it would mean a lot to him if you could reassure him that you would keep your word. And Kennet's like, well, as much as I can, I will. But if they want to attack me, I'm not going to let myself die. If
I won't die to keep a promise. I don't think he should expect that of me. Which, again, is a little bit more evolved version of the Paragon. It's not my fault if I don't do what I say I'm going to do.
Right.
It's somebody else's fault. Of course I can't keep my word. And I find that really interesting because this did feel like a more sophisticated version of that.
For a moment, Etta just looked at him. She seemed twice on the point of saying something, but made no sound. Finally, she asked quietly, they have hoisted a truce flag. I suppose that could be a deception, but you will try to keep your promise. Etta could kind of tell that he didn't really care if people over there lived or died on that ship. So she's like, try to, at least, for Wintrow's sake.
Yeah.
And he's like, such an odd question. Of course I shall. If things begin to go badly, use your judgment in this. But if you suspect that things may not turn out as Wintrow would wish, take him below. Find an excuse, a distraction of any kind at all. He's scarcely a child to forget one toy when another is waved at him. Do not misunderstand me. I only say what we both know is true. You are a woman well capable of distracting any man. Whatever you must do, I would not hold it against you. Anything. I do not expect you can make him forget his family is involved in this, but he need not witness it at first hand. There. He could not make the hint any broader without actually commanding her to seduce him. Sa knew the woman had enough appetite for 2 men. Of late, she had been insatiable. She should be able to keep Wintrow busy for as long as it took Kennit to deal with this problem. She seemed to be thinking deeply as they approached Wintrow. He was speaking softly to the ship. It's because Etta wants a kid, first of all.
Yeah. Which she is pregnant.
Yeah.
Spoilers. So I find it really interesting, especially because he's like, oh, Etta just likes doing it because she belongs in a brothel or whatever. And it's actually because she loves and cares about him and wants to give him the child that he has asked her for. I don't know. So weird.
So Wintrow is talking to Bolt here, trying to get some reaction from Vivacia, bringing up Althea, saying like, you're going to be yourself again when she's on deck, whatever, it's going to be great. And Bolt is just very ambivalent to everything, just even-keeled. I am not angry, Wintrow, I am bored with your whole recitation. I've often heard of priests that they will argue until a man agrees with them simply to still their tongues. So I will ask you this. If I pretend to feel something for her, will you shut up and go away?
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. For an instant, Wintrow bows his head and then lifts it to stare at the advancing Paragon. No, I won't go away. I'm staying right here beside you. When she comes aboard, there should be someone here to explain to her what has happened to you. This would never do. He made a swift decision. Kennit cleared his throat. Actually, Wintro, I have a small task for you first. Take Etta with you. As soon as we are at anchored, I wish you to take the ship's boat and row over to the Marietta. Some of Sorkor's men are a bit hot-headed, and of late they have grown used to having their own way. Tell Sorkor, diplomatically of course, that I alone will be in charge of taking this ship. I wish him to hold the Marietta well back. It would suit me best if his crew did not even crowd the railings. This ship comes to us under a truce flag. I don't wish them to feel outnumbered and threatened. That could lead to violence where none is needed. Sir, could you not send, Wintro began pleadingly, and Kennit pats at his hand, and she takes the hint and says, don't whine, Wintro. Like, it'll do you no good to remain here and let Bolt torment you. She's toying with you. Let's just do what he says. You have a gift for smooth words, and we'll be able to pass this order on to Sorkor in such a way that he does not feel slighted. So Etta takes the hint. Etta and Wintro are going to go over to the Marietta, and Kennit gets his way as well. He gets to keep the Marietta's crew below decks. He gets to keep everyone away from the other crew potentially shouting his past secrets.
Exactly.
And he keeps Etta and Wintro together, confined, out from under his watchful eye as he hopes that she will seduce him. And also gets Wintro away from upsetting Bolt and away from his family, as he might have to kill everybody.
Right. And on top of that, keeps Etta and Wintro both away from also potentially learning his secrets.
Yes.
Which I think is more what he's like the top priority. But yeah, interesting development.
He doesn't want Althea. Well, he doesn't want Wintro standing next to Bolt's figurehead, first of all, because Kennit is planning on sinking Paragon, right? And that would be betray Wintro's trust.
Exactly.
And everything. But two, if somehow it doesn't happen and Althea was coming aboard, which she does, as we know, and Wintro is there to talk to Althea immediately, that also doesn't serve Kennit's interests. He doesn't want them to have any information. This is Bolt now. It's not Vivacia. Bolt has a deal with him. Vivacia does not have a deal with him, even though Vivacia liked Kennit.
Yes.
So that's it.
Yeah,
he's sending him over.
Can't give them any ammo.
Yeah. Nice and clean. He sends them away.
I will also just make the comment, there were some differences that when you were reading, but again, they're just little, and I'll only bring them up from now on if they change the tone like that one did. But yeah, so there are lots of differences in this chapter for some reason, and it's weirding me out.
At the end of that monologue from Etta towards Wintro, Kennit is... This is actually a really funny passage in my mind. He said he listened in admiration. She was so adept at making Wintro seem both foolish and selfish for trying to oppose him. It must be a female talent. There had been a time when his mother had spoken to him like that, letting the edge of impatience show to convince him of his error. He thrust the memory from him. The sooner Paragon was gone, the better. Not for years had so many buried recollections stirred so uncomfortably in him. But I think it's funny because that's what he tries to do all the time.
Yes, yeah.
Just be like, you're foolish and selfish for trying to oppose me.
Right.
Like, here's the logic of why you need to do exactly what I say all the time.
Exactly.
So a master can compliment another master.
Yes, but also really funny to be like, oh, must be a female thing when he does it all the time.
So Wintro's kind of like, oh man, I'd hoped to be here when Kennit met. And it would look as if we flaunted you as a hostage. I wish them to see you are a willing member of my crew, unconstrained. Unless, Kennit paused and gave Wintro an odd look. Did you wish to leave the ship? Are you hoping to go with them? For if that is your desire, you but have to speak it. They could take you back to Bingtown or your monastery. No, even Etta looked surprised at how swiftly Wintro replied. My place is here. I know that now. I have no desire to leave. Sir, I would remain at your side and be witness to the creation of the Pirate Isles as a recognized kingdom. I feel this is where Saw intended me to be. I'll go to Sorkor, sir. Right now? Yeah, so basically Kennit's like, yep, that's perfect. Tell him no matter what he sees, he's to stay away.
Right.
Wintro and Etta are leaving over to the Marietta, and Kennit will be alone on Vivacia. So when they leave the foredeck, Kennit then talks to Bolt. It's like, why do you torment him so much? Like, why does he insist on bothering me with his fixation of Vivacia? What exactly was so marvelous about her? Why cannot he accept me in her stead? Jealousy? If he had had more time, it would have been an interesting possibility to explore. He rolled her questions aside with, boys always strive to keep things as they always have been. Give him time, he'll come around. Then he asked a question he had never dared before. Can serpents sink a vessel? I don't mean just batter it so it can't sail, I mean send it all the way to the bottom. Preferably in pieces. I don't know, she replies lazily. Would you like us to try? For a moment his mouth could not find the shape of the word, then, yes, he admitted, if it becomes necessary, he added feebly. And then her voice drops. Consider what you are asking. Paragon is a live ship like myself. A dragon, kin to me, sleeps within those wooden bones. You are asking me to turn on my own kind for your sake. Do you think I would do this? That brings a jolt to Kennit. He's like, oh, man.
Yeah. I forgot to think about other people having loyalties.
Yep. So the Paragon's anchoring outside of arrow range. They're not complete fools about everything. So he has to win her over to his side very quickly. So Paragon is kind of closing in here. They're anchoring up. And he needs the serpents to do this work. He can't fight them himself.
Right.
With me, you come before all others. Should you ask a similar sacrifice from me, I would not hesitate. Really? Even if it were Etta? Without pause? Or he promised, with refusing to let himself think. Or Wintro? Her voice had gone soft and knowing. A knife twisted in him. How much did she truly read of his heart? He took a deep breath. If you demanded it. Would she? Could she insist he give him up? He pushed the thought aside. He'd talk her out of it. I hope I hold his dear place with you. He tried to think of other fine words, and failing, he asked her instead, will you do it? I think it's time to tell you the price, she countered. So interesting talk here. Bolt is also kind of toying with Kennit, seeing his mettle, because she is willing to do it. But she needs to know the price. Because immediately after this, after they're done, she says, you're going to escort all of these serpents to a river and give me all of your winter, all of your spring, and half of your summer until the heat is high, so we can help these serpents become dragons again.
Yeah. So that's the price. And I find it really interesting that she also wanted to make sure that Wintro was on her side first, and which I think is what that test was, right? Saying
Wintro was on her side?
Sorry.
Kennit?
Kennit.
Okay.
Make sure Kennit is on her side.
Yeah.
Which I think is what the test is when she asks, would you
do the same?
Yeah, would you kill Wintro if I asked you?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. So there's the price that she said she would tell him later.
As we move north, we will seek to gather up other serpents. You will protect them from attacks from humans. When we reach the river, I shall take you up it while your other ships guard the mouth of it. Well do I know that no ordinary wooden ship can accompany them on that migration. You will give to me, Kennit Ludluck, all that remains of this winter, all of spring, all your days until high summer and the sun's full heat, as we aid the serpents in what they must do and guard them through their helpless time. That is the price. Are you willing to pay it? In the naming of his name, she bound him. How had she known? Had she guessed? Then he glanced down at the small, grinning charm on his wrist. Looking into features twin to his own, he knew his betrayer. The charm winked up at him. I, too, was once a dragon, it said quietly. So the charm betrayed his true name to Bolt.
Right.
And this is the first time in these books that he is fully named Kennit Ludluck.
Yes.
First time readers finally know I mean, they should have known
Right.
already at this point, but finally know and can piece together that
Kennit is a Ludluck.
Kennit is a Ludluck. He is not born of Bingtown, but from Bingtown trader family.
Yes. But I think especially this naming of his last name is important because Kennit was so sure that you could sail a live ship without a blood bond. And so a new first time reader could think that maybe this is a distant relative. It's not necessarily a Ludluck
Yeah.
that's on the ship, Paragon. But I mean, obviously the clues are there. But it is the first official saying of his name, his full name.
In him saying in the naming of his name, she bound him. I don't think that's
The magic.
naming magic or anything like that. That's, she knows my secret.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I was, because at first I was like, that's wild. How does he know about naming magic? And then I'm like, oh, because this isn't magic. This is one more person that knows a secret.
This is blackmail.
Yeah, exactly.
He dared not refuse her this. He thinks that it might undo all of the months he's spent, because just to disappear is very bad for a burgeoning kingdom. But also, it could add to his legend, and he can't refuse her. He dared not allow Althea on board the Vivacia. And Bolt denied the connection, but Kennit would not take the chance. She had to be turned back and stopped now. Had he taken Vivacia from Wintro, he would not chance losing her to another. So he says, if I do this, will you sink Paragon? So basically he's thinking like, oh, okay, to add to my legend, disappear, but things are moving very quickly. Paragon's lowering its boat. Althea Vestrit is going to be in that boat going over to me. I can't allow anything to go fast. I need to make these decisions. I need Paragon to be sunk. Let's just go through it. I can't think about anything. Let's make the deal. Because he likes to think things over, usually. So he asks, if I do as you ask, will you sink Paragon? It was harder to ask now, for he knew that she knew all the reasons he desired Paragon to end. Tell me why you want him gone. Say the words. I suppose my motives are the same as yours, he said coldly. You do not wish Althea to come aboard, for you fear she would bring you back to yourself. There floats a piece of myself I could do without. Then it seems wisest for both of us, she agreed coldly. He is mad. I cannot count on him to aid us. Worse, as a live ship, he could follow us up the river and oppose us. He can never fly again as a dragon, so let us put him out of his misery, and end your misery as well, while binding you to me. Only me. Jealousy. This time it was unmistakable. She would tolerate no rivals for his attention, let alone so potent a competitor as Paragon. In this also they were alike. And she starts to talk to the serpents.
Yeah.
And this time, she who remembers lifts her head up, talks back, and two other serpents lift up their head and join the conversation.
Yeah, and this kind of worries Kennit. This has never happened before. Mm-hmm. Usually, Vivacia tells them what to do, and the serpents do it.
Yeah, he says this had to be a discussion of Bolt's orders. That had not happened before. He did not think it auspicious, but dared not interrupt her with a question. So he's now asking his charm what is going on, because he's not going to interrupt her.
Right.
Saying, do they oppose her? And the charm responds, truthfully, actually.
Yeah.
He says they question the necessity, because there's a conversation of, we learn this later as well, and we'll go over it, but it makes sense to talk about it in order here, yes. I guess. So Bolt is saying, hey, weaken the ship with your acid, and then big males jump on it, it'll break it into pieces, and then bring it down to the water, and then other ones can bring it down to the water. Don't eat any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the serpents are like, why would we do this?
Yeah, why would we waste memories, number one? And number two, why would we sink another ship like you? Yeah.
Yeah. And if we do that, why do we not get to eat the memories?
Exactly, yeah.
Why do we not get that sustenance? Why do we not get that energy? Why do we not I don't know, is there something there that you don't want us to know? And she is doing this to protect Kennit's side of the bargain, right?
Yeah.
Because those memories hold Kennit's secrets.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting because why does she care if serpents get his secrets? Is it because she wouldn't be able to get them herself? Or is it
Maybe it could be also maybe a connection with Kennit, right? If she is jealous about guarding that one connection.
mm,
I don't know what would happen if Paragon was eaten by a lot of different serpents with Kennit's memories still housed within him.
right?
I really don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, they are questioning the necessity, and the charm is kind of giving him a blow by blow recap of what is happening. Bolt is visibly angry, and behind him, Kennit was aware of the gawking of his crew, so he kind of commands Jola to say, the men to their posts. But they are going to obey Bolt. The serpents do head out finally from Bolt, from Vivacia, and head towards Paragon.
Right.
We switch back over to Brashen's point of view now. Not Brashen's
Althea's
point of view?
point of view.
Oh, Althea's point of view, yes.
It's just talking about Brashen first.
The first word is Brashen, so. But they are separate. Brashen remained with Paragon because they need somebody aboard the ship at all times. It'd be stupid to put them all in one little dinghy in
Right.
between. So Althea and Jack and Half
And Lop.
and Lop, yes, are in this little small boat that is rowing. It's already about, I don't know, close to halfway to Vivacia. And she's, in her best clothes that she can get.
Which
That
is
are still nice,
right.
which is like heavy skirts and things from Bingtown.
Yes.
She's hoping that Kennit will still take her seriously, even if she is in those kinds of clothes. But they're literally the best clothes that she owns now because everything has been fraying. And she has her written scroll that she worked really hard on, the document, the agreement that she's going to set over, the trade agreements and things like that.
Exactly.
So she's all ready. She's nervous. And then she sees a bunch of serpents around Vivacia.
She also mentions that when she had first gotten into the dinghy, or before she had even gotten into the dinghy,
Oh, right. Yeah.
there were a lot of people on Vivacia's deck, and now there's only Kennit, and she thinks she saw Wintro, but not because she recognized him from sight, because he had dark hair and the way he was standing made her think of
Her father.
Yeah, her father.
Yeah, Ephron.
And so she's pretty sure that was Wintro, but he's gone now, and she's thinking about how it's weird that it's just the captain and everybody else has disappeared.
Yeah, so she glances back at Paragon and sees Brashen there with Clef and Amber. Paragon has his arms crossed and his jaw set, and there's a terrible finality in the brace of his muscles. He had not spoke a word to anyone since Vivacia came into sight. When Althea had dared to reach out to touch his muscular shoulder, she had found it set and hard as wood. It was like touching the tensed back of a snarling dog. "Don't be afraid." He had made no reply. But Amber, sitting on the railing beside her, had shaken her head and said, "He's not afraid. That anger that burns in him destroys every other emotion. Danger cups us under its hand, and we can do nothing but stand witness to the turning of the world. Here we walk on the balancing line between futures. Humanity always believes it decides the fate of the whole world, and so it does, but never in the moment it thinks it does. The future of thousands ripples like a serpent through the water, and the destiny of a ship becomes the destination of the world. Can you feel it? Look around you. We are on the cusp. We are a coin spinning in the toss, a card fluttering in the flip, a rune chip floating in a stirred water. Possibilities swarm like bees. In this day, in a moment, in a breath, the future of the world will shift course by a notch. One way or another, the coin will land ringing, the card will settle to the table, the chip will bob to the surface, the face that shows uppermost will set our days, and children to come will say, that is just the way it has always been. Amber, You're frightening me. Am I? Then you grow wise. Amber blinked at her and saw her again, because during that whole thing, she was just kind of staring off into the distance, eyes unfocused. And Amber announces it's time to go. Come, I'll help you with your hair. And she says, watch over Paragon for me. Amber replies, I would like to, but today is a day he must face alone. And so Althea's in the boat.
Yeah. I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because as rereaders, we know this is beloved. And so we know this is a prophecy. And this is very similar to how it is described in the final trilogy when Bee has the visions that when they are happening as she has foreseen them, she sort of goes into a little bit of a trance and sometimes says things without meaning to, I guess. But I find that so interesting to see that here as well. And this sort of talk of we're on the precipice, whatever happens here changes the fate of the world.
Yeah. There's a lot of momentous things happening in this chapter and a lot of decisions to be made.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting thing to think about because Amber says that there's a lot of things spinning in the air right now. And the way that they land is in the future, people are going to say, you know, that's the way it's always been because this moment will be forgotten by most people. But this moment is what decides a lot of that.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because I'm wondering, in your opinion, is this about the future of dragons or
future
is
of
this
everything?
something else?
I think it's a lot of things because if there's a few things in here and I haven't fully thought them all the way through, but I think if any one of the things turns out differently, we don't get the full, you know, construction of the kingdom of the pirates in the way that it's set up.
Right.
Maybe Kennit lives during one of the ending events and he rules for a while. Maybe Paragon does perish and the serpents eat him and then they gain new memories and they go rogue or like find their own way or something. You know, there are differences that could happen all over this chapter. And I think they affect everything, not just the serpents, because everything's kind of tied together in this book.
Yeah.
And in this story. So it kind of all goes together with the, I don't know, the new kingdom of the Pirate Isles and the reordering of Bingtown and all of that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't personally read it as just being about the dragons / serpents, which obviously that is part of it and it always will be. But I do, like you said, I do think of it as also about the future of the Pirate Isles and maybe even the future of Bingtown. Like, I feel like there's a lot happening here under the surface. And it is an innocuous day, right? It is just a random day where they're going to go meet and have a conversation. And that's enough to change the fate of the world.
Yeah. And Amber saying, you know, am I frightening you? Then you grow wise to Althea. So, kind of revealing like, oh, there's more to me than you know. But also her insistence that Paragon must face this alone.
Yeah.
Usually Amber has been babying Paragon.
Yes.
To over babying him, I would say, in some cases.
But do you think that Paragon himself is a catalyst and that she doesn't want to baby him in this because this is part of the big change?
I don't know. I don't really like using the word catalyst for anyone besides Fitz.
Okay.
And maybe like a couple other key people like Wintro because she's looking for him specifically. Okay. And maybe the conversation later of who is Bee's catalyst / was it Bee herself?
Right.
Because again, everyone makes the changes.
Right.
So I have no idea. Maybe he is the catalyst in this moment.
Right.
I don't know.
Interesting. Okay.
What do you think of and why do you think of like that?
I don't know. I was just thinking about the fact that she says Paragon needs to face this moment alone. but yet still does not go with Althea. And so I just found that really interesting that she's choosing this.
Maybe Althea needed to go alone too.
That's fair. But I always, I don't know, because I do feel like the Beloved definitely has their own sort of set of rules
Yeah.
and ideals that they live by. And so I feel as though this is just a rule for them of being near the catalyst, but not, and I know that you don't like that, but being near the catalyst for lack of better terms, but not actively acting in the moment.
I don't mind if you say catalyst. Like, I'm just not going to
I'm allowed.
Yeah, I'm not going to make claims of
yes, yeah.
catalyst myself.
But I don't know. But I think the idea that Beloved can prepare people for their moment of changing their fate, the world's fate, but feels very strongly about not actively being there during the changing of the fate or like doing something during the moment. And so then I was wondering if maybe that's why she stayed behind because
we do see that a lot more in the next trilogy with Lord Golden.
Yeah.
How Lord Golden is very loath to actually take parts and stuff, but kind of has to.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Well, we catch back up with Althea in the middle of the water in between the two ships. She's thinking about that past event and hoping that the stories about Kennit are true, that his foresight and intelligence are apparent, and he will take this offer at face value, but also with the impact of the future in mind, and that this will work, because that's what her hopes rest on.
Right, and she hopes that he would at least hear her out. And it's so funny to see her point of view of, oh, I hope he's intelligent enough to give us a chance, as Kennit is actively plotting on how to murder everyone before they can even talk to him. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to listen.
He had hung out a truce flag of his own, so he was open to negotiation. He would at least hear her out. Even if he loved Vivacia, perhaps especially if he loved Vivacia, he would see that returning her to her family in exchange for vastly profitable trade agreements was in everyone's best interests. Suddenly, Amber lifted a finger and pointed ahead of Althea. At the same instant, Lop gave a wild cry, echoed by Half, who dropped his oar and came halfway to his feet. Althea swiveled her head to see where Amber pointed and froze where she sat. And so the sea was boiling around Vivacia with all the serpents, and she's afraid that Vivacia is being attacked, but all of a sudden Vivacia kind of throws back her head, almost seemingly unhinges her jaw, and her hair starts waving around, kind of like a serpent's ruff.
Yeah.
And starts singing / ululating back at them and speaking with the serpents.
And I think interestingly, she talks about how at first she thinks Vivacia is being attacked, but then when she realizes that it's just Vivacia talking with the serpents, she finds that to be even worse than her being attacked. And I thought that was really interesting. How is it worse that she can speak with the dragons?
Well, she has a terrible, chilling knowledge moving deep inside her. She pushed it aside as one flings off the lingering terror of a nightmare, refusing to know it. Mine, she insisted to herself. Vivacia is mine, my family, my blood. So it's she's not who I thought she was. And deep down, like, oh, maybe there is more to her than just a wooden ship.
Right.
And my family.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know her anymore, because that's kind of her fears, right? Is that she grew up, she grew away, she grew apart from Althea, and that she doesn't need Althea anymore. One of her hidden hopes and fears.
Yeah, definitely.
So she commands, saying like, hey, let's get out of here. Half, sit down and shut up if you can't be useful. She did not have to speak again. She sat down hastily as Lop and Jack bent eagerly to their oars.
Right.
So they're going to go back to the Paragon. But Vivacia lifts her hand and the serpents go towards Paragon and bump the boat around.
Yeah. And she mentions that Half is really afraid. He is kind of huddling in the boat.
PTSD.
Yeah. And she does mention that it makes sense and she doesn't blame him because of the last time he was attacked, basically. The last experience he had with the serpents. But there's not a whole lot they can do. They're just in the middle of this crowd of serpents coming towards him.
Yeah. They're arrowing towards Paragon. Althea had never seen anything so lovely or so terrifying. Like flowers turning to the sun, their multi-hued manes began to open around their throats, standing out like deadly petals. On Paragon's deck, Brashen bellowed for them to turn back, to come back to the ship now, as if his command could somehow make the small craft move faster. And then the serpent's kind of shouldering the boat around. The little boat is rocking wildly in the serpent's wake, only to be struck and spun about by yet another passing snake. There was little they could do to save crouched low in the boat and hope it did not capsize. They're wondering if they can survive at this point, and there's nothing she could do for the ship or the crew on board her. She forced herself to think only of what measures she could take. She made her decision as the first mate and not as the potential wife of Brashen. Use that oar as a scull and make for the Vivacia. She's our only hope now. We'll never get back to Paragon through all those serpents. So, Brashen then is just watching helplessly as Althea's kind of in the ship.
Yeah.
in the little boat, being surrounded by all these serpents, and then has to make a decision for his own.
Yeah.
His own ship. His own well-being.
And has to decide, does she trust Brashen as a captain and continue on her way, or does she go back and be with the person she loves before their ship is destroyed? So
Brashen is obviously worried, but he has to worry about his own well-being and his crew's well-being. He regarded her as a captain. He could not see her as his lover just now. If he believed in her at all, he'd trust her to take care of her boat and her crew. She'd expect him to do the same. The ship had to be his first responsibility. Not that there was much he could do, so he just orders to get the anchor up in case they have to flee.
Right.
And he looks at Amber, and she's holding tight to the railing, speaking low to Paragon, telling him all she could see.
I think this is a really interesting growth now that we're in Brashen's point of view, to have him say, I have to trust her. I have to trust that she knows what she's doing because she's trusting in me.
Mm-hmm.
And we just I can't think about her right now.
It's a good reflection from the first part of the chapter where they were talking about what they do and then they assume their roles and take the deep breath. So now they have to, again, do that. They can't think as partners.
Yes.
They have to think about as captain and first mate.
Right. And I think also this is a big jump from whenever they were last attacked and he was taking over Althea's kill. And obviously he didn't think of it that way. It wasn't his intention, but that's how Althea saw it. But there is that learned outcome where he knows that she wants him to trust her, and that the best way for him to show her he trusts her is to let her handle whatever is happening to her right now.
Yeah. So he recalls his last encounter with the serpents, gives them some orders of not to shoot first because we don't want to rile these serpents. They're intelligent, and only shoot at, the weak spot that we found before. And he looks at Amber, he's like, harm the ship maybe? She says he doesn't want it. Nor do I want your archers. Paragon's voice was hoarse. Listen to me, Brashen Trell. Tell your men to set their bows and other weapons down. Keep them to hand, but do not brandish them about. I want no killing of these creatures. I suspect they are no danger to me. If you have any respect for me at all. Paragon let the thought die away. He lifted his arms wide and suddenly shouted, I know you. I know you. And you know me. What did this ship mean? Brashen is thinking. But as Paragon threw back his head and filled his chest with air, Brashen suddenly knew that the ship spoke to the oncoming serpents, not the crew. Paragon dropped his jaw open wide. The sound that came from him vibrated the planks under Brashen's feet. He's speaking to the serpents. Amber is replying, or at least speaking in a low voice to Paragon, again being his eyes for him, saying, they hear you, they are slowing and looking at one another, Now they come on, but slower than before, and every one of them looks to you. They are halting and fanning out in a great circle around you. Now one comes forward. He is green, but gold flashes from his scales when he turns in the sun. She, Paragon corrected her quietly, she who remembers. I taste her in the wind. My planks feel her presence in the water. Does she look at me? She does. They all do. Good. And he speaks once more.
Paragon confirmed ally and pronoun respecter. We stand.
We stand a respectful, murderous
Yeah.
ship.
We stand Paragon always. But yes. Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to see this chaos unfolding and to have Brashen sort of watching as
Neutral eyes, basically.
Yeah.
A helpless bystander.
Yeah, and I think interesting too that there is that he can't do anything for Althea, he has to trust her, and now he also can't do anything for Paragon and has to trust him.
Yeah, everything is kind of taking out of his hands at the moment, and honestly, he's kind of used to that.
Yeah.
He's used to that feeling. That was his life.
Yeah, that's true, and honestly, kind of feel like that's his bread and butter. Is
I feel like that's a little unfair, but
no, but I mean, not that he can't make decisions and he isn't a good leader, but he loves, a lot like Wintro, he loves not having to be the one that makes the final call in a lot of ways, which is fair. I think being a leader is really hard, and it's nice when it's not your fault in some ways. And he's definitely different from Wintro. He does still take the blame and guilt if anything goes wrong.
True.
But I think he does like allowing other people to shine, if that makes sense. Maybe that's a nicer way to put it.
Yeah, we have Paragon also kind of digging deep into his memories, his dragon memories, and resurfacing those, kind of throwing away, I'm just the Paragon.
Right. And
mentality.
throwing away the human voice.
Yes.
And speaking to the dragons or the serpents.
Mm-hmm.
I find that really interesting because we know Paragon has met the serpents before and did not have a good reaction to them.
Yeah.
And now in this moment, he's speaking to them. And I don't know if it's because his life is in danger or if it's anger at Kennit or what is
anger at Kennit.
Fair.
More so just like he wants the confrontation now. He wants that final meeting.
Fair. But yeah, so anyway, I found that really interesting to know his past of meeting with the serpents and not really enjoying that. And then now here he is in front of them again, actively speaking to them and saying, I know you.
Well, this is a long chapter, so we're going to cut it in half and leave it there for this week. And we will pick up again with the serpent's point of view next week.
Yeah. And
discuss the rest of this chapter. Thank you so much for tuning in so far, and please let us know what you think about this chapter. What do you think about Brashen and Althea's relationship and how it's evolved, etc.? You can email us at isfitshappy@gmail.com. You can go to our website at isfitshappy.com, or you can message us on any of our social medias at isfitshappy at Facebook, YouTube, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, Facebook.
Yeah, I think
if I say any more, I'll start repeating them, I think. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
All right. Short portion this week where we're going to talk about what you brought to us. And we're going to start first with a comment we got on Instagram. This is a comment in response to a question I asked about episode 224, which is chapter 20, Prisoners. And my question was, if you were in Rain's position, how would you plan to rescue Malta? And Le Duchies 6 responded to have faith in Tintaglia. That is how what they would do if they were Rain. Also mentioned that Tintaglia is the best after my man Icefire, our king, our savior, the conqueror of the realm of the Elderlings, which I found really funny.
Yeah, very, sounds like they really appreciate the dragons there.
Yeah.
And I mean, yes, but also Rain doesn't trust
No.
Tintaglia.
Well, this is what you would do if you were Rain.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
That is fair.
trust Tintaglia is a good plan. I also find it interesting to like Icefire. I don't feel like I liked him when I read it last.
I don't like Tintaglia.
Oh,
So
I like Tintaglia.
no, I don't. I don't like any of the dragons really.
Okay.
There are some of the other ones in the Rainwild Chronicles that I like, but I don't like them on. I think it's on purpose that Robin Hobb wrote them.
Yeah,
abrasive.
fair.
Because they are. That's
Yeah.
the show. And yeah, Icefire is super arrogant, and he's like, "Yeah, you're a child, Tintaglia. Everyone here is stupid. I was trying to die. Why'd you wake me up?
Yeah.
Our kind is doomed."
Yeah.
He's not the happiest
No.
of old men.
So yes, I thought it was interesting to have
Talk about an age gap relationship there.
Yeah, actually. A 1-year-old and a 9,000-year-old for all we know. Oof, yuck. Anyway. Glad to have some Icefire stands. We'll have to see if we like him more next book. I don't know.
I mean, I like them as dragons.
Yeah.
I don't like them as beings.
Okay.
And I don't know.
Touche. So thank you, Le Duchy 6, for the response.
We also had a message on Facebook from Claire, and she was kind of listening to some of the older episodes about how, the whole wolves don't have kings kind of thing.
Yeah.
But also thought it was really sweet that since that is a whole thing, how Night Eyes kind of appreciates Ketrican.
Yeah.
And Claire says that Night Eyes calls her my queen at some point.
I think it's in the last trilogy.
Okay, that one's in the last part.
Yeah, and it's more I don't know, whatever
Wolf
the memory.
Father.
Yeah, Wolf Father. I think it's when Fitz sees them again, or it could be next book as well.
Yeah,
I feel as though Night Eyes loves Ketrican.
Oh yeah, of course.
Hard Eyes.
Same.
Yeah. Who wouldn't? She's such a babe.
But it's true, yeah, that they have a really interesting relationship there too.
Yeah. So that is a really an interesting thing to look at, especially because he starts with the whole wolves have no kings. I don't know.
And I'm anxious to get back to Fitz and the Six Duchies.
And the good pup.
And the good pup, yeah. Well, for a brief time at least.
We don't need to talk about it yet. I will cry on the podcast, I'm sure. But anyway, Thank you, Claire. And thank you to all of our listeners.
Yeah.
While we're recording this, it is the day Spotify Wrapped has come out. So we got to see what our stats were for the Spotify listeners out there.
Don't say that. Everyone will know how far behind on recording we are. It's like 2 days before it comes out.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Well, surprise. But yeah, so we just saw our Spotify Wrapped, and I just wanted to say, I think we both did, thank you so much for everybody who listens to us. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, we've been seeing growth year after year, and that's all thanks to you guys recommending and passing the word around and talking about the podcast and messaging us and kind of giving us motivation to keep going.
Yeah.
It's all great. Everything kind of is circular here. So
yeah, and shout out to the over 55 crowd who is joining us this year a lot. There was I think it said 275% growth of that age demographic.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining.
It's really cool because this podcast has a lot of different demographics than I am used to in my talks about fantasy, because fantasy online historically has been very young male dominated. This series especially, and doing this podcast, has really had a much wider audience, which I am extremely grateful for, all the different points of view.
Yeah.
Because I think on Spotify I think it's 25% identify as male and 50% as female. And then there's unspecified as well.
Right.
So it's awesome to have such a wide demographic listening and tuning in and relaying your opinions on
Yeah.
characters that I've really loved over the years that might be different opinions than mine.
Yeah, it is
Which
really
is also the fun of talking with you about it, Emma.
Yes. Yeah, no, it is really fun to get to talk to each other about a series that we like, but also with all of you. And I think it's just crazy to me how many of you there are.
Yeah.
I think one of the stats that we got was we are 178 people's number one podcast on Spotify. And
We just posted. I can look up the exact
maybe it was
number.
168. It's somewhere in that range.
163.
163. Thank you.
Yes.
So 163 of you, we're your number one podcast. And that's a crazy number to me. Like, I went to a high school that had almost 200 people total for 4 grades, and almost that same amount of people listen to our podcast. That is so many people.
Almost that many people
that are just have us as their favorite, like, alone. And that's crazy. And even if we're not your favorite podcast or your number one podcast this year, thank you for listening. This is crazy. We love hearing from you guys. We love that you're listening to us and that you care.
We're coming up on 5 years of this podcast. So
which is crazy.
It's awesome that we're still getting new people in, and we're still holding on to some of the old people who have been listening for so long.
Appreciate you all.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So thanks for being part of the family, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time.